Paleo to Pioneer presents Small Batch Science, Episode 11.
Welcome to another edition of Small Batch Science at Paleo to Pioneer. I'm Andy Hemmings, and today we're going to do something a little different because it's haircut day. And if nothing else, we're ridiculous. Every bit as ridiculous as history and archaeology and all of it can be as well. And that's really what I want to do today, is 3 short stories that I've come across in the last year or so involving the Apache, Yaqui, and some very twisted incidents between each other and Americans and Mexicans as well. So the truth of the matter is the stories, especially all of the Yaqui stuff and the Apache things that I've been reading, up through 1886 with the surrender of Geronimo and the last of the Apaches, are really kind of sad. It always kind of ends with the same unhappy ending and 27 years as prisoners, and it's just awful. But in the midst of all that, there are some ridiculously funny stories, and today I'm going to tell a couple of those. The first is from one of Eve Ball's books called Apache Voices. My copy is on loan to another scholar at the moment, so I don't have it with me, and it was written with another lady whose name is utterly escaping me. But it talks about, I think in the roughly 1870 eras, 1870s, maybe even late 1860s, some of the easternmost Apaches, including Mescaleros, and this is Mescalero a reservation in New Mexico in 1910, were with some Lipan Apaches out in Texas or on the eastern edge of New Mexico somewhere, and out hunting and going to go hunt bison, and narrowly missed being annihilated by some Comanche that were stalking them. So in Eve Ball's book, May Peso II told this story to her. The Apache are winding their way down the mountains out into the plains on a really narrow path. They've got basically nothing to eat. They're on their own. Basically, they have to get food. They're working their way down this really narrow path, like it's really dangerous. It's almost like you could fall. They don't want to travel at night anyway, but it would be really rough. They come to a place where there's a gigantic boulder, and they are sitting sort of on the top and back behind it. All they have to eat are some wood rat, and somebody opens them up and starts pulling the guts out to prepare them to eat, and starts throwing the guts off the trail, basically over the other side of the rock. And what's happening is there are Comanche people that saw them walking down the trail that have snuck up the other direction and are sitting in ambush on the other side of the rock. And one of them must have been speaking, because the entrails landed on his face and in his mouth, and all the Comanches started laughing. At which point the Apache figured out what had happened, and they started laughing. And the story ends there, so it's not clear if they ever spoke or anything, but whatever attack was about to happen didn't happen, because the Apache guy had thrown rat guts into the face of one of the Comanches without knowing that they were even there. The next one I want to say is from August of 1886, when right before and right at the time that Geronimo and his last group of nearly 40 people surrendered. The story is related by Gatewood in a totally different manner, and I, for the life of me, have not been able to figure out which book about Apache stuff. I think it's one of Eve Ball's books, actually. Tells the story from really the Apache side. And so Geronimo and his group are holed up in the Terrace Mountains. They're down on the Mexico side, I think in Chihuahua, not Sonora. And 2 ladies go out to a little village and get food and bring it back, and they're kind of intentionally letting themselves be seen so they can be followed. And 2 scouts, this is a postcard of some Apache scouts, I don't know the one that Martin and, I cannot say his name, I'm afraid I've never heard it said, Keata, I think, are the two Apache scouts with the U.S. soldiers that follow the ladies into a canyon, and it's sort of winding around, or sort of more like a dry arroyo, following that trail, and they're going to go up into the mountains. Well, as they're going through the dry wash, they come around a bend where it sort of chokes down a little bit, and there's a bush that somebody has put an old pair of pants on top of. So it's a very tense thing. They don't know if they're walking into an ambush. They have no idea for sure that Geronimo wants to surrender or just is planning an attack. Who knows what's going on exactly. But this is a very unusual thing, and the two guys sit there for a while and just cannot decide. They're convinced this is it. They're going to get ambushed, and they're goners. But it is kind of funny, it's just one of those, is it or isn't it? It turns out it's not. They managed to make it by. I think the soldiers come up and look at it real hard and try and decide what it means, and eventually pass on. But just one of those little things that could be another hiccup in the whole historical trajectory of the surrender of the last of the Apache that end up coming to Florida. Martin and Kayenta are distant relatives of Geronimo, and there's some interpretations to say that once they make it past the pants and come into sight of the Apache, they yell down, come on up. But Geronimo's telling the people that are on the edge of the rocks there to shoot him. And one of their relatives, one of Martin's relatives, yells down to him, "It's fine, come on up, and if anybody shoots them, I'm going to kill them," including Geronimo. And at that point, the rest is sort of history. They come in, bring in some of the soldiers eventually a day or so later, and things go off peacefully. But for a very tense moment, a pair of pants sitting on a bush held things up a little bit. My last story is about the Mexican Revolution. I don't know if it's 1910 or maybe a little bit later, maybe in the teens or so. It wasn't dated. It's just a story told by the daughter of a man named Phil Clark in an old issue, I guess it's 1974, of the Journal of Arizona History, about the town of Ruby. Ruby, Arizona was a hit or miss mining town on and off for 30, 40 years, and then in the 1930s up through about World War II, it actually really flourished and became quite large, several hundred, maybe thousand people there, and then sort of disappeared after that. But it's an interesting ghost town today. There was a nature special written and filmed about it in the 80s, I think. It's really cool. It's really worth seeing if you want to see it. Like, it basically shows how the tarantulas took over and all the wildlife and plants in the area. It's just a really neat special about a cool old ghost town. But before that, during the Mexican Revolution, Phil Clark, who owned the general store there and served a lot of there's actually a picture of him in here and his wife, much older, but this is, obviously much later in life, but it's sort of funny to be able to see the guy. And it's one of the most ridiculous cross-cultural misunderstandings and kerfuffles in all of the history of all the junk I've ever read, and I thought I'd share it because of that. So the Yaqui have a very, very unhappy history with the Spanish, the Mexicans, the Americans, from starting with their first warfare is probably in 1533, and it goes through 1929. There's actually aerial bombardment of Yaquis fighting with Mexicans and Americans around Naco, Arizona, and Sonora. And during the Revolution and early on here, and these are some pictures from 1913 and maybe 1910 or so of some Yaqui soldiers participating in the Revolution. Very active on both sides of the border for quite a while. And so this story is about a place a little bit west of Nogales. This is just a quick and dirty map. Doesn't have a whole lot of detail, but just west of Nogales is a little place at the border called Casas Piedras, and that ran the few miles, maybe 4 or 5 miles, I think it is, up to Ruby. So there's rumors of invasion all the time, bands of revolutionaries coming across. The store is just Clark, his wife, their 2 kids. There's a couple of Mexican guys that live farther down the valley, closer to the border, and that's it. Everyone else lives much farther away and around. So they're pretty much on edge. His daughter says that he hid guns everywhere, and basically his rule was never be more than one step from a firearm. One evening, he hears a truck, and basically steps out into the woods or something with a rifle and just waits. And it turns out it's American soldiers that have come and are trying to round up all the Anglos on that side of the border to bring them to Arivaca where they can be protected. I actually have some photos of a couple of these are American troops wandering around Nogales about 1916 or 17, and this is actually the 7th Cav as reformed after Custer's debacle, but this is the 7th Cav outside of Sonora, outside of Nogales at that time, and this is from, I don't know if he's actually in here, but this is from that brief period of time when Edgar Rice Burroughs was with him. I don't think he was in Sonora. I don't think he came to Arizona, but he was actually in the 7th Cav. So, soldiers come, tell Clark and his family, look, we're taking you out of here. We're going to hide you out until it's safe, and we can let you come back. And he says, no, I can't do that. We'll lose everything. I have nothing if we go. But he sends his wife, and he sends his 2 kids. But there's a guy with them who's not a soldier named Frank Murphy that's a good friend of his who says, well, if you're staying, I'll stay with you. And so they get all the guns out of all the guns and ammo that they have out of the store and climb up into the mountains and sit and wait across from the border where it's basically a single little trail and it's real narrow and nobody can get through more than sort of single file, so they figure they can at least hold things there and maybe have a sporting chance of surviving this. Before the soldiers had come, a very proper, formal Mexican man, older guy from the Nogales side. He lived in the Sonora Nogales side. He lived in the old Nogales ranch era. Named Guzman had come through, and Clark tried to tease him all the time, like just joking with him, tease him. He tried to make him crack up, and he could never do it. And this day before the truck came, Guzman had come in with his burro to get his supplies that basically lasted him a month or so. And Guzman saw that Clark had tried to install a rain gauge on the side of the building. And it was a big clunky thing sitting in a pipe, and it wasn't staying up very well, so Clark had wired it, put wires all around it, like through a hole in the adobe or something. But Guzman asked him what was that, and Clark explained that it was a canister wired to a control panel in his bedroom that if he heard anything out there, he could push a button and release enough poisonous gas to kill a whole regiment, rather than just telling him it's a rain gauge. So Guzman walks all the way around it, goes into the store, gets his stuff, walks all the way back around it, and heads back to Mexico. So that night they climb up into the mountains, Clark and his friend Murphy, and nothing happens. They wait for another day, they go back down to the store, and nothing happens. After about 3 days, his wife and kids come back. They're just sitting there. Everything's fine. There's been no problems. And he remembers that Guzman had gone, and he thinks, oh man, if those guys were there. And it's supposed to be a Yaqui or Mexican guy in charge of it named Camargo. I'm sorry, Camargo. Camargo. I've had zero luck looking this guy up. And I think he's Yaqui, but nothing. He was supposed to be with 100 men, and he thinks, oh man, Guzman is a goner. There's no hope. Well, several weeks later, basically a month passes, and lo and behold, Guzman walks back in with his burro, and Clark says, holy cow, I can't believe that you survived. We thought for sure that if you ran into the revolutionaries, they would have killed you. And he goes, yeah, I saw them. They were not happy. They searched me. They took my tobacco, but let me keep all the rest of my stuff. And he says, well, weren't they going to come here? We heard they were going to come and, rob the store and kill us or take everything. And he goes, yeah, they were coming. But I told them about your canister, and they decided not to come here. So, the moral of the story is, always tell outlandish practical jokes, because they may save your life. Thanks for watching, and we'll do more episodes of Small Batch Science real soon. Bye.